What's up, y'all? I'm Deeg, here to share Deeg's thoughts all about Guild Wars 2 and the recent news drop we had on Friday. Sitting here today, it is July 5th, 2021, and on the 2nd, on the Friday prior, we had a mega news blast from ArenaNet, the studio behind Guild Wars 2. Today, I'm going to break down some thoughts about the announcement and talk through just a few things about it that I think y'all might find interesting and hopefully useful in your further discussions about the game and the studio and their future together. First, though, I want to start with a sentiment, and it's about hype. Hype is okay. Well, those of y'all who know me might be surprised to hear me say that, but I think hype is okay. At the end of the day, games are businesses, yes. Art, yes. Community, yes. And that all to me adds up to culture. They're all these things, individually and together. Businesses, they want to separate you from your money. Yep, we know this. We can accept this. At the same time, we can also accept that the art of gaming has personal significance and meaning. The communities within gaming create moments for people to come together, and the culture that all that creates that is ultimately about something bigger than the game itself. And because of that, I think it's okay to be hyped. I think it's best to be hyped and informed, and that's the goal that I'm pressing today. I have a variety of insights about the future and past of Guild Wars 2 that we're going to see this news blast through the lens of, and we'll see how we do. Without further ado, let's bring that thing up, though. Here we go. ArenaNet Studio Update, July 2021. There are a handful of fantastic creators out there. I'll name drop a few. Wooden Potatoes, Mighty Teapot, MMO Inks, at Muckluck, and I think Xandria too. I've all done breakdowns where they read this news article to you word for word. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to assume that you've read it yourself, or that you have watched one of these other videos, or that you're happy for me to summarize it. Because we can't live here too long. We have further horizons to map out. Look at this great piece of art to start. Oh my god. This is gorgeous. What a tone piece. Oh. So we start off with Ruby introducing herself. Good to hear from Ruby as always. Love her. Brief preamble. This is a section where John Taylor, who I've written in my notes as John Taylor the Shy, introduces himself as JT. And if you do a Control F, if you do a find on this webpage, you won't see the word John or Taylor anywhere, because John Taylor only refers to himself by his initials. John is the Guild Wars franchise director, the game director in charge of Guild Wars. And we don't know John very well. I have some further comments on this down the line, but this is where we start. And it's really good to hear from John in what I hope are his own words. And next we move along to this lovely image. I am not the best person to speculate on what this image means, but we can make some logical connections. We see daggers, we see purple and pink Mesmer daggers, right? Mesmers don't have an elite spec that features daggers, so maybe that's what we're seeing here. That's very exciting. Elite specs are one of the most important things in Guild Wars when it comes to actually playing the game, and I love to see this stuff. Love the tease. Next, End of Dragons, delayed from late 2021 to early 2022. The July announcement planned for, can I do math? 3 weeks from tomorrow is still on. So that's good. I've heard a variety of sentiments shared about the expansion. There are some people who are bummed it's coming later than we thought. I feel, and I think many more feel, happy to have the expansion delayed and given the time it needs to be an absolute banger. there was a point where I was playing Guild Wars 2 every day. And if I was in a position of being an everyday Guild Wars 2 player, I might feel frustration about this. But admittedly, I am one of these gamers now who plays multiple games, and Guild Wars 2 is just part of my diet. So with that being the case, I'm happy to play many, many amazing games that are out there. I cannot and will never have enough time to play all the games that interest me. And having this arrive later in a better state, to me, is just a win, win, win. Kenson, hey, what's up, Kenson? Really good to move the expansion to 2022, considering they were going up against Endwalker and SWTOR new expansion. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of good reasons. Also, this is going to land plenty far enough ahead of whatever World of Warcraft does for the next expansion, too, which we should start hearing about sometime in 2022. There are lots of, I think, great reasons to have this delayed, and I'm pleased with it. Next. A familiar face returns. Who could it be? This is very simple. Colin Johanson, the hype train conductor himself, comes back to ArenaNet to swing his sword, and to swing his sword again. This put a great big smile on my face. No logical reason, it just did. And it's even doing it right now. I have a lot of happy associations with Colin. Admittedly, I can credit a lot of this to the fact that I started playing Guild Wars 2 in 2015 during the Heart of Thorns hype era, when a lot of that was going on. But anyway, this makes me happy. Going forward, Choo. Here is where I'm going to start hitting just some of the broad summary segments, and I will return after to give some more of a detailed breakdown. So what do we glean from this section? First, Colin Johanson started working on Guild Wars all the way back before it had an expansion suffix in what we now call Guild Wars 1 Prophecies. He left in 2016 during the Path of Fire pre-production. We didn't know from this side of the aisle that that's when pre-production was going on for Path of Fire. From our side of things, it looked kind of like this is the build-up to Season 3. If you were playing at the time, that's what you might remember. That's when that happened. So what's Colin been up to in the last little bit since leaving ArenaNet and returning? I think this is kind of worth mentioning real fast. So first he went to work at Amazon, where he split his time between being a senior manager in product management and a franchise lead on Crucible. When he was in product management, he did a lot of stuff working on streaming stuff. Again, the word stuff 15,000 times, but we move on. Stream Plus project lead. He and his team built the first prototype technology ensuring the funding for Twitch extensions. A great piece of technology. If you played games like Borderlands 3, Destiny 2, you'll know exactly what this is. It allows for overlays that show information about the game and allows some kind of stream interaction. Very cool piece of technology. Really cool to see that Colin was involved with that, especially because historically, Guild Wars 2 and streaming have not gone hand in hand. Next, he worked on at an Amazon Game Studio, broadcast studio, as project lead, where my notes here make no sense. It looks like what happened here was he helped get a live streaming studio set up for live events for Amazon Game Studios, the result of which is in the first year of use, it turned a return on its investment, which is actually a pretty, I think, impressive thing to do for streaming technology, for a streaming service, to my lay levels of understanding. I gleaned all this from his LinkedIn, and the last thing he said about it was he was nominated for and graduated in the inaugural class of the Stratus Advanced Leadership Program. Don't know what that is? Sounds cool. In January of 2019, interestingly enough, just the month before the ArenaNet layoffs, he moved over to working as the franchise lead on Crucible. A very exciting job working as a franchise lead on a game. Crucible didn't do so hot, though. I'm not the person to ask about this because I don't know a lot about Crucible. Actually, one of the people who I'm hoping to interview in the near future knows a lot about Crucible, so hopefully I'll be boning up my understanding vicariously at some point. But here are the salient details. Crucible was a PvP shooter with MOBA bones. It started development in 2014. After Colin started working on it at the start of 2019, it released in the middle of the year 2020, not 2000, 2020. It was yanked back to beta a month later after a rocky release, and then 4 months after that, it was shuttered permanently. What I know about Amazon Game Studios is that they seem to be quite patient, and they seem to be willing to make multiple games until they arrive at something that they believe can be a billion-dollar property. So I don't know if this is necessarily a reflection of Crucible being a bad game. A lot of games release in an iffy state and become good over time. My sense is that Amazon's strategy is to fail fast when it comes to games. But for those of us who are in a position to be working on those games, I imagine this is a pretty rough moment. And Colin, being the franchise lead, was hit pretty hard by it. Anyway, it looks like John Taylor reached out to Colin not long after Crucible was shut down. Let's see. Other bullet point from this section. One of the things that John and Colin talked about was a renewed focus on the player. This is very interesting. And I'm going to mention one more point, too. And I'm also going to go back on what I said before about not diving deep. I'm actually just going to start with the deep dive, because screw it, that's what we do. So they talked about the renewed focus on the player, which to me suggests kind of a synchronization with the overall philosophy that I feel we've seen from Colin in the past. And I'm going to talk more about that very soon. This also, just by being in this note, kind of suggests, formally, linguistically, that player focus has lapsed in recent years. Colin, in his own words, points back to testing, feedback, and resulting improvements that were done previously, supposedly when he was working on the game. And to me, this signals a potential return to a more experimental ArenaNet. An ArenaNet that was doing crazy stuff with FOMO content and Living World, with raids and legendary quests and all this stuff, which to some will be exciting and to others will be, I think, a little concerning. But that's what this is sort of saying, I think. He also enshrines Living World, World versus World, PvP, and Endgame PvE as 4 game modes that are specifically called out. Here they are. This may be more or less important than it seems. I'm not sure which it is. It could just be this is just like reminding people, but my sense of it is this is actually a statement of intent to not just recognize these as existing core game modes, but to say that these will be core focuses. Foci? Is that the plural for focus? We're going to play it safe and say focuses of the game going forward. And, interestingly enough, in my opinion, they're sort of listed in the order of uniqueness to the Guild Wars franchise. Living World is a completely unique thing to Guild Wars 2. There's no other game that does episodic content like Guild Wars. I don't think. I haven't seen anything. If I'm wrong, help me point it out. World versus World, extraordinarily unique to Guild Wars 2. A misunderstood, underdeveloped, but mode that I think many feel has the most potential of anything that Guild Wars 2 is doing. And I'm not the person to comment on it, but this seems right to me. And then we have player versus player and endgame PvE. So endgame PvE is kind of at the end here. That does me a little bit of a sad. I would like to have seen it listed earlier. This list isn't necessarily a ranked list, but it kind of sort of is. That's the way language works. And And endgame PvE is like my favorite content. But that said, it is good to see endgame PvE in here at all. The only thing that could have made this better to me is if the word raids was in there all by itself. But we take what we can get. Famaris says, experimental ArenaNet is the best ArenaNet. Scary and a little unpredictable, but always something cool at the end of the tunnel. I tend to agree with you, man. I think that, and we're going to get to talking about this, that Guild Wars is potentially coming out of a period of a very conservative approach to systems development. And I find that very interesting and exciting. Let's move along here. I have a few other comments too. Okay, the last important bullet point here is this one. JT and I have created a new role that's focused on leading development strategy for the live game. This is pretty cool. So previously, Guild Wars 2's game director has been a single role that's overseen development of both the live game and the expansions when they're created and released. At least that is what I think is communicated here. And going forward, we're going to see a different approach, where it suggests that the person who's running the live game will be focused entirely on the live game, which I think is a huge boon to the existing loyal audience of the game. I'm hoping what this is saying is that there will be people dedicated to making expansions too. That's not said here directly, it's sort of implied, but that would be a really great partnership to see. See the John Taylor of the world, the John Taylors of the world focus on expansions, while this lovely gentleman who I'm about to introduce will be working on live ops. And that gentleman is none other than Grouch. Josh Davis coming back. So it looks like a couple months after Colin came back to ArenaNet, which actually, you might be interested to find out, happened back in January of this year, 6 months before this announcement. But there must have been a conversation, and Josh Davis got the invite to come do this, and he said yes. What is this role? Well, we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but who is Josh Davis, first of all? Josh is he's a former brand manager and the PvP team lead at ArenaNet, working on Guild Wars 2, starting in around 2013, about a year after the game came out, till the end of 2016. And I don't know his story as well as many do, but from what I can tell, Josh was known for busting ass for the community. I've heard multiple testimonials from creators that there's a ton of collaboration that would never have happened with the studio, between creators in the studio, if it weren't for Grouch and his efforts. I also know that during the time he was there, PvP was at its strongest in Guild Wars 2. And even though PvP doesn't float my boat personally, I feel like Guild Wars 2 is at its strongest when it has a serious PvP presence. And that's being represented with development efforts and prize pools and things like that. So he left at the end of 2016, and it looks like on his LinkedIn that all I know is that he worked as the head of community when he was there. And that's where he worked up until coming back to ArenaNet and returning as head of live ops. So I don't know a lot about what he worked on there. Grouch is a seemingly very interesting person who I'd love to talk to. And if he ever hears this, Josh, look me up. Let's talk. But there are a couple of great comments I want to highlight from Josh's section here. Number one, bridging the gap between players and developers is a passion of mine. Boom! That speaks right to my heart. Love that. I love to hear that. I think one of the biggest problems in modern gaming is the gulf that exists between gamers and the people who make those games. And that gulf is roughly described by the horrifying conflicts of interest from having your livelihood being based on the art you're making. It's a very different world when you say an opinion you have and it can cost you your livelihood, as it did a couple of developers that are reading that back in 2018, versus when you're just some gamer who spends, multiple hours a day playing a video game and spout your opinion off at the internet. And I'm not talking about DeRoyer here. Sorry if it seems like I am. I'm not. I love DeRoyer. He's a good guy. He has good intentions and a good heart. What I am saying is that developers and gamers inherently have a hard time communicating on an equal playing field. And Grouch seems like one of the people who really recognizes that and is trying to equalize that gap. So I love that. I love that. It goes right to my heart. Another very important thing that he says. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. Game development can be a little unpredictable at times, but in general, I believe the benefits outweigh the risks, and we intend to push for this level of communication as much as we can going forward. The acknowledgement that communication in advance is a risk, something we all know, something we love to see recognized. There's a lot I could say about this, but I'm not gonna, in the interest of time. It's very good to see an acknowledgement of the risk of communicating and an intention to do so despite that risk. That feels great. That feels like there's potential for a higher ceiling, for a new frontier, for a new status quo. To me. What else? Okay. So it looks like Josh was behind the summer of 2021 live blog entry that described the summer of events we have coming up with the Return of the Living World stuff, where they're giving us a new episode every single week to go back and re-experience, where we're getting the Twisted Marionette fight coming back to us pretty soon. I'm excited about that because I've never got a chance to do it because I wasn't playing Guild Wars 2 when that came into the game. And the Legendary Armory, which is a huge new tentpole gear feature that's going to make legendary gear a lot more useful than it already is in Guild Wars 2, and I think will incentivize people to pursue it who maybe felt it wasn't worth the effort previously. So that's pretty exciting. And really pleased to see someone of the known caliber of Josh doing a job that's important. This is a great headline. I love this troll. Alliances win this year. Alliances are a feature for World vs. World that has been teased and discussed for years by this studio. And it's pretty good to see definitive plans here, although it must be said these are still plans. So we have been here before. We have seen communication about this before. This is probably the most specific we've gotten. And very cool thing that I like here. Let me see if I can find it. Here it is. World restructuring features will be released in a multi-phase beta. We'll release a part of the system, test it in the live game, gather your feedback, and iterate up for future release. So this word iterate is extremely important. ArenaNet has this fantastic history of being this amazing creative studio putting out features that honestly have the potential to push MMOs as a genre and as an industry forward, but oftentimes don't get sufficient gas put into the effort of iterating on those features and keeping them polished and modernized going forward. And this is a big system. I didn't explain it, but currently in World vs. World, there's this very awkward system where in order to determine what faction you're playing on behalf of in World vs. World, it's based on a choice you make when you make your character, your server. The only thing your server does at this point in Guild Wars 2 is determine this. And it must be said that sorry. I just said it's awkward. And I was about to say something else, and I realized that that wasn't quite right. What I will say about World vs. World Alliances is, to me, this is one of these things that would make me want to engage with the game mode more. Where it's the idea of moving from a server-based alliance, a server-based allegiance, to a guild-based allegiance, where teams on World vs. World are comprised of alliances, groupings of guilds, that then voluntarily band together at any level in the game, at any point in the game, to create these factions in the World vs. World fight. And that is a lot more interesting than being like, oh, what server am I on? Let me find the TeamSpeak for my server, and I'll just go play with whoever's there. The ability to choose who you play with in an MMO is one of those things that is so important. In the world versus world, it's very hard to do that right now. This addresses it. Very cool. What else? Client optimization. So, Guild Wars 2 is getting DirectX 11. That's right. They're actively working on it, and they expect to have an opt-in beta later this year. They do hedge it a little bit by saying it might not fix frame rates, but it will give some stuff. So cool. This is one of those things that's been tossed around in the community for a little while, being like, we need an upgrade from DirectX 9. DirectX 9 sucks. It is out of date. I'll share my experience here for people who are interested with a game called PlanetSide 2, which actually just followed this exact same upgrade path from DirectX 9 to DirectX 11 back in 2019. Yeah, I think that's right. That happened. So what happened was, at the time, there was another PlanetSide game being made called PlanetSide Arena, and it was using a more modern graphics API. And there was enough in this development effort to essentially leave room to bring the PlanetSide 2 engine up from DirectX 9 to DirectX 11. They did it. It came in. It was rocky as all hell when it came into the game. It took months for all the bugs to get fixed. But once that finally did get all ironed out, the performance floor of the game was higher. Everyone got higher frame rates that I talked to. It definitely had a positive impact for me. And I think perhaps most importantly for the developers, it created technical headroom to bring in higher quality assets and visual stuff into the game. So I think that may be something we can look forward to for Guild Wars. The PlanetSide 2 team is a lot smaller than the Guild Wars 2 team. So hopefully when this does come into the game, we can see a little bit more of a polished implementation. But at the jump, even if you don't see a frame rate increase, you might see other indicators of performance improvement, such as higher stability, fewer graphical hitches, less pop-in, all kinds of good stuff. This is just an unambiguously good thing. And something people have been wondering for a while why it hasn't happened. Moving along. Look at this lovely portrait of these fine folks. Who can we pick out? I must know a few of these people. Oh, this is, crap, what's his name? He's in Teapot's chat all the time. Name does not avail. This is, I think this is Ken Benson right here. Who else? That looks like Joe Kimmis. Yeah, I think that's him. The Super Adventure Box background going here. Oh, here's Bobby Stein, lower right. Good old Bobby. Love to see it. Love all the backgrounds they have. That's Microsoft Teams life right there. You gotta make a personal statement with your background. Very important. Anyway, love to see the crew. That's beautiful. A little more information here. So, what we can expect from the July 27th announcement coming up in 3 weeks. A new trailer. That's pretty damn hype. Feature reveals and information. What does this mean? This is potentially very important. Heart of Thorns gave us gliding. Path of Fire gave us mouse. End of Dragons will yield. What? What will the tentpole feature be? I'm very excited that we might be getting a longer promotion cycle for End of Dragons, going from the middle of this year to the start of the next year. In terms of the length, it's a lot more similar to Heart of Thorns. I don't know what ArenaNet's plans are for filling the void with content. I'm hoping they do have definitive plans, but as a creator And as a fan, I like to see this stuff come out early and give us some grist to chew on. It's a lot more fun than just here's everything, go play it. Um, Even though that is its own sort of interesting fun as well, I suppose. Okay, a weird one. I mean, weirdly phrased. Look how carefully this is written. News about Elite Specialization beta events. News about Elite Specialization beta events. So this suggests to me that we may not be hearing about what the Elite specs are, or at least all of them, but we're going to be having some expectations set about when we will learn more about Elite specs and some betas. So maybe the ability to actually have a beta Guild Wars client where we can play these specs, which would be very cool and is in line with that kind of philosophy of let players get their hands on it and give some feedback. I'm excited about that, even though this makes me think we're not going to learn very much about the Elite specs themselves this month. We'll see, though. Next, story, characters, and art. Yep, all important, all good stuff. Event design. Here's something I'm going to be scanning for. I tend to believe that Guild Wars 2's open world is one of the most important things it has going for it. I played a whole bunch of other games, and none of them have the same cool vibe as the open world in Guild Wars 2. These high production value events that's getting swept up in the moment and experiencing these big events and moments and the excitement of seeing a train of people go by and joining in. And yeah, maybe it's just glorious button mashing fun, not the most skilled thing in the world, but there's something undeniably social about the Guild Wars 2 open world that a lot of open worlds don't nail in the same way. And I like that. But Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire had very different philosophies for events. Heart of Thorns events were kind of designed, like the entire zones were designed around these endgame meta events that were very repeatable and rewarding. Path of Fire, on the other side, was kind of designed for single playthrough, and what events there were they were a lot less important to the experience. And as a result, in 2021, years after both these expansions, the Heart of Thorns maps are still pretty well populated, while the Path of Fire maps are appropriately deserted. Kai, actual MMO gameplay in an MMO. Not a surprise you like it. I love MMOs in my MMO. So I'm going to be listening keenly in this announcement about what the event design philosophy will be like. I have a funny feeling that they're not really going to tell us. Maybe they'll tease a world boss and show us a couple of specifics, but we'll see. I have my hopes up, and we'll see what happens there. Last but not least, we get this picture, which seems to be an in-game shot of Xingje Monastery. It's looking pretty good. I'm not really seeing any interactables, like mushrooms or anything like that. It looks like it's going to be very mount-friendly. And yeah, there's a big question, I guess, about whether they're going to design this with the idea that you would have mounts going in. I suppose they can't. Anyway, that's grist for another discussion. But it's looking great. And this announcement got the community so hyped. Right now, the community is bubbling over with excitement and pleasure from this. It's interesting this came out on a Friday, which kind of suggests to me that ArenaNet wasn't sure this was going to be received as good news. Friday news tends to not get as much attention as news released earlier in the week. And but for the community of people who already want an excuse to love Guild Wars 2, this is all just like a love letter. The things people want and they want to see. The thing that I tweeted is that this is a great, unambiguous signal of intent from the studio. And it is. Let's see, what else do I want to say about this? Okay. Summarizing thoughts. So upon first read through of this, yes, it's insanely validating. There's so many great hits in this and warm moments, but upon sitting with this for a couple days, I've asked myself, what is the soul of this message? What is the main thing that ArenaNet is trying to tell us? And really, at the end of the day, what this is about is leadership. And what changes in leadership mean. Since the news drop, there's been a fair amount of debate in the community, at least a little bit more than I was anticipating, about, was Colin Johanson actually good for the game? Is him coming back good for the game? What does it mean? What they do was good, what they do was bad. What can any leader do that's good or bad? Is this all just vapor? Because at the end of the day, people who make the game are the designers, not the directors. Well, I have some thoughts. In order to get there, we're going to go into part 2 of this little thought exercise and talk about the history of Guild Wars 2 leadership since launch. And this is going to be an effort of me to glean together all the things I remember, all the details I can find, and some insights I've been able to piece together between the lines to talk about how leadership of this game has progressed and what this change in leadership could mean relative to what we've had in the past. Let me pull up a picture here for a tone piece. Look at this. Look at this shining gentleman. Ah. All right. All right. Just one picture of Colin. Here we go. We're going to go with the PAX South announcement. Big Heart of Thorns energy in this picture. So the first era I'm going to talk about post-launch Guild Wars 2, in terms of Guild Wars franchise leadership, is the Colin Johanson era. Now, it must be said, little disclaimer, I don't have any insider information. I know as much as you guys do. Everything here I've pieced together from listening to other creators, looking at LinkedIn, reading articles that anyone can read. Anyone can gather this information. And piecing it together with what I've learned from outside the game in my own life. But that disclaimer aside, I'm labeling the Colin Johanson era of leadership the experimental era, which Famaris called out earlier. The experimental era of Guild Wars 2 leadership. This is a period that was really characterized by a boldness in trying stuff and communicating early and getting feedback. Very collaborative vibe, and it started around the time Guild Wars 2 launched and went until Colin exited the company, which was in early 2016. My supposition is that he had involvement up through the conceptualization in the beginning of Season 3 of The Living World, which came out about 9 months after Heart of Thorns. He was promoted to game director when Guild Wars 2 launched, and he was at its helm during what I think you can fairly look at as its clumsiest era, Living World Season 1, a period punctuated by disappointment and thrills. I defer a lot to other creators to characterize this time because for me, I only came in at the end of it in 2015, during the Heart of Thorns hype cycle. Before that, I was doing other stuff, not playing video games. But that's my impression of this time. And again, I mentioned openness, experimentation, collaboration were really the vibe that I get when I look back at this. But I want to take a moment to talk about the culmination of this era, in my opinion, as an outsider, which was Heart of Thorns, Guild Wars 2's first expansion. It came out in 2015, just about 3 years after the original game launched. I don't think there were any firm plans for an expansion when Guild Wars 2 launched. There was this idea that we would have this world that would just get updated whenever it needed to get updated, without any need to sell an expansion. That changed at some point along the line, and a bunch of new system improvements and launches were rolled up with alongside new zones and new story to go into this expansion. And to me, Heart of Thorns is like my favorite time of Guild Wars 2. It had the massive long news cycle. We got a Fractal revamp, which, while technically it happened before Heart of Thorns, I'm going to lump it in. It happened during that time. We got the introduction of raids, which are beloved by many. We got the introduction of the elite spec system, which is a brilliant way to solve a problem that games like even World of Warcraft struggle with. World of Warcraft classes, at least from what I've seen, have barely changed across the last few expansions. But because of elite specs, Guild Wars 2 has a sustainable, stable way to meaningfully vary the gameplay of each of their 9-player professions every single expansion. It's hard to do, but it's very cool, and it's a great system that I love, and I'm really looking forward to End of Dragon's elite specs. They brought in the Mastery system, a way to frame up horizontal progression, and give players things to work towards that are easy and measurable and definable after max level. This is a great system. Collection quests they brought in with the legendary collections. Boom. Finally a way to proactively identify stuff you can do in the game and to make progress on it. These have some limitations, but the fact that they were brought in at all is great and something that Guild Wars 2 didn't have. I remember in the Heart of Thorns lead-up, one of the things that they really talked about was the desire to bring quests, more traditional quests, back into the game. And this was an answer to that. Stronghold, a new PvP mode. Yes, it didn't last, but the idea of a new PvP mode is a very strong one, and an idea that I love. And an example of this era of experimentation. Lastly, the Desert Borderland. I think people don't like Desert Borderland. I don't know why. I'm not a world versus worlder, but this is another example of a serious attempt to iterate on the Guild Wars 2 formula. What else was good about it? So the open world of Heart of Thorns was designed for people who have already mastered the core game. It was clearly designed for endgame from the jump. And that was exciting to me. As a core MMO gamer who has, as many as 15 years ago, was leading raids in World of Warcraft, this to me felt amazing. The story was kind of like, the quality was there, but in terms of the length, it was like postage stamp sized. It was really there to get you through the game, through the maps, move you through it, introduce you to stuff. And I like that. My general preference when it comes to MMOs is to see games that focus on player story above game story. It was kind of like an MMO gamer's expansion. Had all these things that really spoke to that core audience. And in that sense, I think probably a lot of people who fell in love with Guild Wars 2 for how it was not a traditional MMO probably didn't like it. And this goes to the next section here that I have, where at the end of the day, a lot of it wasn't very well received. Raids were contentious, not least wise because they made the mistake of releasing them during a content desert for everything else. And there was this really awful combativeness within the community that resulted, where people hated raids because they weren't getting content for them. Man, those were some intense fights on Reddit, I remember. The open world was not well received among the silent majority, I don't think. Event schedules are great for committed players, but they're kind of alienating to casual players who just log on when they log on. The gliding masteries were badly tuned for casual players, too. They were very long grinds. Fractals, I think, fared pretty well at the end game, but honestly, to this day, they remain fairly intimidating to approach. Raids, like I mentioned before, there was the problem of the releases and the content desert, but also, raids have this perception of being this hardcore thing. The cool thing about raids in 2021 in Guild Wars 2 is that they're actually very doable because of power creep and a variety of other things, community resources. I think raids are easier to approach from a difficulty perspective than fractals for a variety of reasons. But the raids have basically died off. There's been no team that's been devoted to their systematic creation and development since Bastion of the Penitent, is my impression, which released in 2016. Was it 2016? I think it was 2016. Elite specs, they're amazing, but I think that they're probably a massive design challenge to iterate on, which, funnily enough, reeks of Guild Wars 1 and their design challenges towards the end of its life. I wonder if those are better or worse. Masteries, great system, but I don't think the studio really knew what to do with it for a few years. It got kind of used in the living world as this way to introduce map abilities that then weren't used outside those maps. And this idea of progressing horizontally on your character was kind of a lie. If I can only use this bouncing mushroom mastery in one part of the world, is my character really progressed? Eventually, they figured out to start doing this, but it took a while. Stronghold never got what it needed to become relevant. I don't know what it would have needed, but it never got it. I mentioned that Desert Borderland, which apparently is not good. Lastly, what I'll say about the Colin Johanson era is at the end of it, my sense is that the studio did not have a clear direction for Season 3. Maybe I'm wrong, but this is my sense. And the community had a sentiment of a high level of frustration with what felt like missed expectations. The experimental era, Guild Wars 2, with Colin Johanson seemingly at the helm. Let's talk about this next era. When Colin left the company, ArenaNet president Mike O'Brien took on an expanded role by becoming the game director for Guild Wars 2 as well. His stewardship of the game, from what I can tell, picked up with early to mid Season 3, included Path of Fire, and dropped off either right after Path of Fire or after the very start of Season 4. His responsibility for Path of Fire, I think, is probably the most interesting comment we can make about Mo's time as game director. And he was president during Colin's era too, so he had an effect there. But I'm trying to find the differences, right, between these game directors. And what I learned, well, okay, before I get there. So Mo was director for Path of Fire. During this time where Mo was the game director, the studio arrived at a very reliable content cadence for the living world. If you remember, one of the most amazing things about Path of Fire is it came out in a couple of months after the last episode of Season 3 and hit the exact same cadence as a Living World release. And then Living World Season 4 started up just a few months after the expansion. That was an amazing, aggressive feeling content schedule that to many reflected a golden era of the game if you're a PvE player who enjoys Living World and story content. Seriously, an important, amazing thing to be said. I know that I think Mike O'Brien's came up through game development as a programmer, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if he had this really great impact as saying, no, we're going to set up a plan and we're going to execute on it, and kind of programming out the game, you know, and the expectations of what we can expect. Also during this time, Mo introduced a change in communication strategy. We stopped hearing about stuff ahead of time. We stopped being asked for feedback before things came into the game. We stopped getting an idea of what was coming. Like I mentioned, Path of Fire came out as an almost surprise. Holy shit. And no one asked us what we wanted or what we thought about it before that happened. There was a real clamping down on sharing of plans and pre-release information compared to when Colin was game director. This, and if you look at Path of Fire and ask what it did, it delivered this incredible story with these amazing regions of the world. But did it expand on the way masteries worked? Not really. Did it expand on raids, on fractals, on anything? At some point along the line, we ended up getting strikes and I guess strikes were Iceberg Saga thing, weren't they? But I think if you look at the way that the MMO was built during this era, we can see a very conservative approach. And that's what I'm labeling the Mo era, is the conservative time. So we go from experimental Colin to conservative Mo. And arguably, this time is an era where the game kind of stagnated for lack of system progress. The layoffs happened while Mo was technically still the game director in February 2019. A number of unannounced projects were shuttered at this time. And one of the things that you wonder is when you see a Mike O who ends up leaving the company later in the year and transitioning game directorship over to Mike Z, who, when I looked at it, turns out was actually managing Guild Wars 2 as game director since right after Path of Fire launched. Which kind of suggests to me that Mike O at that time had transitioned to being focused more on these unannounced projects. So when the unannounced projects are sacked, Mike O decides time to transition away. He wants to move things over to Mike Z. And this kind of was soft announced after season 4, after the layoffs during the Iceberg Saga announcement, where Mike O didn't get up on stage. Mike Z did. Mike Z, so he's kind of the next era, and it's a bit of a question mark because, like I mentioned, he was kind of running Guild Wars 2 from the end of right after Path of Fire launched, till right at the start of Iceberg Saga, but he was not doing so up front. We didn't hear from him in the same way we heard from Colin or Mo as game director. I think you can see this time, which would have been kind of mid season 4, I think, all the way to the start of Iceberg Saga, as Guild Wars 2 at some of its best and some of its worst. I've spoke at length about how much I love the treatment of season 4, especially the last 3 episodes, Guild Wars 2. It was a real impressive moment for the game and a real testament to what can be done under the Living World model. But just shortly after the Iceberg Saga, Mike O announced he was leaving the company and was turning things over to Mike Z. And then about a month later after that, Mike Z stepped out the door too, but did so quietly and seemingly went to go work on Crucible with Colin Johanson and some other ArenaNet developers. And then in a continuing line of confusion, soon as Mike Z left, John Taylor apparently stepped into the game director role for Iceberg Saga. And he's been the game director up until recently. I mean, he still is. And he's the one who brought Colin on. The End of Dragons announcement happened under his directorship. And all of the Iceberg Saga and the decision to cut it short and in favor of End of Dragons happened under him. We know very little about John. I couldn't find him on LinkedIn. He's not done any videos. He's not been on any guild chats, I don't think. I haven't seen him really in any interviews with him, and he even didn't have his full name put in that announcement. I don't know why John is so cagey about appearing in front of his work. But maybe that's part of why Colin got brought in. Because Colin's a real figurehead, in a way. Henry, does he even really exist? I actually have a little joke written here that he could be a fake person for all we know. Who is John Taylor? Excuse me. Which brings us to the most interesting part of this discussion. The future. So, oh, you know what? I've left this on Colin Johanson the whole time. That's fine. We'll just leave it on him. Sorry, Mo. Sorry, Mike Z. Sorry, John Taylor. This letter specified that John Taylor leads the Guild Wars franchise and that Colin would be coming to co-lead the studio. This kind of suggests that Colin is here to co-lead Guild Wars. And that's how it's sort of presented. But that's not what's actually said. So we have to ask ourselves, what is Colin actually coming to do at ArenaNet? What are his actual main responsibilities going to be? Personally, from what I know about the way career progression goes in these industries, I kind of doubt Colin would come back just to work on Guild Wars 2. I kind of doubt it. Another data point I'll bring in. DirectX 11 makes a lot more sense if the technology will be used for more than just Guild Wars 2. Another data point. I think it's likely and fair to say, perhaps, purely speculative, of course, that the 2019 layoffs weren't only a failure of side projects, but they were also a validation that the Guild Wars 2 formula is working. It's working. ArenaNet has a history of being a single game studio struggling to branch out. And personally, I do not doubt that they are still attempting to do so. To me, piecing all this together, although Colin is being stood up in front of Guild Wars, I think it could be reasonable to suggest that Colin's most important responsibilities might not be Guild Wars 2. It might be another game, another project. And that's absolutely okay. Summing up. I wasn't really sure if this thought exercise was going to be a good idea. Combination of news and speculation. What is there actually here for the human to grab a hold of? How is this going to change the way you see the world or engage with it? I like to ask myself this question before I sit down to do one of these streams, because to me, it puts a filter on what I think is worthwhile to put time into. And a few answers avail themselves for this specific topic. Number one, I don't think there are that many voices thinking beyond the surface of what this announcement means for the studio. And what we seem to have is a lot of creators who are very excited to really validate ArenaNet for doubling down on Guild Wars 2. We have some very exciting Guild Wars new announcements. But just because we have some exciting announcements doesn't mean that doubling down on Guild Wars 2 is actually what's happening. We could still be in a state where people suspect we were for years when Mike O'Brien was running the game, where Guild Wars 2 is kind of in this conservative mode of continuation, while other projects are the real roll of the dice for the studio. For any game studio, it is kind of hazardous to stake your entire existence on a single game. It makes sense to want to branch out. It is moral and good to do so. If you care about the people who work at ArenaNet, what you would want for them is to have multiple successful titles, not one basket with all their eggs. And I know that there will be a point in the future where another shoe will drop and people will realize this announcement, in all of its flair, was trying to paint us a story of Guild Wars 2 being the golden child, when perhaps it might not have been. And so my hope is to kind of, for those of you who spend the time to sit with me and think about this, to get ahead of that moment. I also really want to suggest that I've seen this kind of idea that some questions about what leadership is really good for in a game like this, and some lack of understanding among the gamer, the creator scene in Guild Wars 2 about what can happen when a new leader comes in. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about my experience with leadership changes. There are these great periods of transition, and they're ripe with change, or the potential for change. What's very common to happen with an incoming leader is there's an opportunity for people who are willing to speak up to get some wishes granted. Why does this happen? Most teams working in technology or gaming labor under some level of technological or process debt, or a simple lack of buy-in from leadership. And incoming leaders always want to quickly build rapport with the existing teams. And one of the things they will do to do that is greenlight stuff that has historically not had buy-in from leadership. They'll look for stuff that aligns with their philosophy and what they want put their name on, and they'll say, go get it. And that's should be exciting for Guild Wars 2 fans. That's what we're seeing with alliances, I think. Colin sat down and asked Grouch and the team, what does the live game need? And someone said, World versus World really needs alliances. And they're going to make it happen. My personal takeaway from this, I think this is very cool. It means to me, at a minimum, we're going to be seeing at least a few more years of Guild Wars 2 before whatever's next. New projects take time. And because we've had a recognition that the Guild Wars 2 formula works, I think there's a pretty good opportunity that whatever comes out might not be a one-to-one replacement for Guild Wars 2. If Guild Wars 3 is a thing that happens, I think it could be something very different and perhaps complementary to Guild Wars 2 rather than a replacement for it. Is Guild Wars 2 too big to fail? Maybe. But I continue to hope for success for the game and for the studio. For me, it's all about the people. End of Dragons is a really exciting moment for this game and this franchise. And I'm going into it with as much excitement as the rest of y'all. My great hope for all of us as gamers is that we be sophisticated consumers of our own appetites. And this is hopefully giving you a few arrows in your quiver to do so. I think that's the talk. I'm not so sure that I will do this again. I'm not too sure this kind of coverage is something that I need to be doing. So if you do find yourself watching this and you like it, would you do me a favor and tell me? And if you don't like it, also tell me. Crickets. Yeah. Darkness like it. Fimit like it. All right, cool. That's appreciated. I really don't want to get into a position where I'm breaking news, you know? It's not really my vibe. And also, when it comes to stuff like this, I'm kind of putting my foot a little further over the line than I have any right to do. I don't really know what's going on inside ArenaNet. And to a certain extent, it's appropriate for me to speculate based on what we know. And to a certain extent, there's a risk of offending or a risk of going too far, presuming something that I should not do. I really do believe that it's important to reason and judge without perfect information. I think the idea of having perfect information is perfectly impossible. And these kinds of judgments that I'm making today is something that we all do. The hope with this is that by airing these thoughts out loud, we get the chance to collaborate on them, see if they sound right, and improve them. My goal, if I have one at all, besides responding to the demons inside of me, is to try to raise the bar on the way that we commune over games. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but I gotta try. All right. I think that'll do it for tonight. I have an intention to, after I do these thought streams, to keep the stream on and do Q&A or something afterwards, some kind of post-discussion content, but I'm not going to do that tonight because, to be honest with y'all, I'm just kind of whipped. But I'll give something to look forward to. If you like Guild Wars 2, tune in on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be having on Lord Helseth. He is a 2-time Guild Wars 2 PvP champion and a colorful personality. The self-admitted best mesmer to play Guild Wars 2. It's going to be a dip into the PvP side of Guild Wars 2. It's something that I've really, really wanted to talk to someone about for a long time. And that's going to be super duper fun. Again, Lord Helseth, podcast, 3 p.m. Pacific, Wednesday. Sorry, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, the 7th of July. And sometime next week, I'm going to be sitting down once again with Mighty Teapot. And we're just going to go nuts. I have no idea what we're going to talk about. But we're going to have round 2. And if you want to get the most out of that podcast, highly suggest, if you haven't done so, you go back to YouTube and check out my conversation with him last year. Way back in episode number 27. God, that's like so long ago. If you're watching this on Twitch, don't forget to find me on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to find me on Twitch. And if you want to keep up to date, I got a Discord server where you can catch me any time of the day, and my Twitter, where I'll share all my random thoughts that I have. I had the chance to get out this weekend with my wife to actually see a little bit of the great outdoors, which is a little awkward and also a little thrilling, considering I'm used to sitting in my apartment staring at plastic screens and drywall surfaces. So that was definitely a change of pace. And I tweeted about that. If you want to see stuff about me and my personal life, I like sharing that stuff with you guys. I'd love if you share it with me too. But beyond that, I'll be back next week on Monday to talk about something else. I have a funny feeling it's going to be World of Warcraft related because it's kind of a hole that I'm falling into. Whereabouts? Kai. Whereabouts for what? There's Twitter. There's Discord. Is that what you were asking, Kai? Continue the flow. You'll ask later. I'm just cinching it off for the night, dude. This is gonna be it for me. Yeah. I'm Deeg. Keep it real. Oh yeah, one last thing I'll mention. As soon as this, at the same time this video goes up on YouTube, I'll also be publishing a new monthly vlog on my Patreon, talking about how things are going and some bonus IRL musings. This month it's going to be in video form. So if you want to catch that, be sure to check out my Patreon, which you can support for a small token amount. The main thing there is to find a way to give people a little more behind the scenes access. If that's something that they want, and I'm trying to make that a thing. So I will see y'all there. Yeah, that's gonna do it for me. I'm Deeg. I have thoughts. I love Guild Wars 2, but most importantly, I love y'all. Let's come together and figure out how to do it better and better. Have a good night. Catch you next time. Peace.